Welcome to Raaonline. I am Dr. Rajapriya, Professor of Anatomy. Today's class is Anatomy of Wrist Joint. Objectives of this session is at the end of the class, you have to describe wrist joint under the following headings: type of joint, articular surfaces, ligaments and movements and muscles producing these movements. See, note down these pretest questions please. What type of joint is found in wrist joint? Name the articular ends forming wrist joint. Mention the movements occurring at wrist joint and the muscles producing it. At the end of the session, you will all be able to answer these questions. Okay. Before going into the wrist joint proper, first we will understand the bones of wrist. Okay. Here we can see our hand. See, this is the distal end of the forearm, carpal bones, metacarpal bones. Wrist joint is nothing but the link between the forearm and the carpal bones. So, you can see the distal end of forearm bones here. This is the radius and this is ulna. This is radius and this is ulna. This is lateral aspect and this is medial aspect. Okay, this is the distal end of forearm bones. Coming to the carpal bones. The carpal bones, there are eight carpal bones arranged in two rows, a proximal row and a distal row. The proximal row has 4 bones from lateral to medial side. This is called as scaphoid bone. This is boat shaped. This bone is boat shaped. And this is called as lunate bone, which is moon shaped. And this bone is called as triquetral bone. And this bone is called as pisiform bone. Pisiform bone will be placed more anteriorly and it lies over triquetral bone. If you see nicely here, there is articulation between radius and scaphoid and lunate and triquetral. Pisiform is not involved in the formation of wrist joint. Similarly, you can see ulna here, but ulna is not involved in the formation of wrist joint. I will tell you the reason why in the next slide. Okay, just you understand the bones of the wrist. Distal end of radius, distal end of ulna, scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, pisiform. And distal row has 4 bones. They are from lateral to medial side. Trapezium, trapezoid, capitate and hamate. Okay, coming to this picture, see this is our articulated hand which has a set of carpal bones, 8 carpal bones, 4 in the proximal row and 4 in the distal row, and metacarpal bones numbered from lateral to medial side as 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th metacarpal, and these bones are called as phalanges, and from proximal, middle and distal phalanges. All the fingers as proximal, middle and distal phalanges except the thumb which has only 2 phalanges, proximal phalanx and distal phalanx. This is about, I think we have understood the bones of the wrist. This is the wrist joint. See, this entire skeleton. Wrist joint is link between the forearm and the hand. You can see this greenish, green shaded structure between the radius and the proximal row of carpal bones. This is the wrist joint. I will tell you what are the bones involved and what are the articular ends. Coming to type of joint. See, is the wrist joint movable or not movable? Yes, it is highly movable. So, it belongs to synovial joint or diarthrosis variety. Once I mean synovial joint, it is greatly mobile. Then, what is the shape of the synovial joint? Condyloid variety or ellipsoid variety. See, ellipsoid variety is, you can think like a long sausage fitted into a trough where the cattle will drink water. That is the shape of ellipsoid. See, a long sausage fitting into the trough, that is called as ellipsoid variety or the condyloid variety. And what type of movements are possible here? Movements are possible across 2 axes, therefore it is called as biaxial joint. Flexion, this is flexion and extension occurring at the wrist joint in transverse axis, and adduction and abduction occurring along vertical axis. So, it is a biaxial joint. So, we are very thorough with the type of joint. It is a synovial joint, It is an ellipsoid variety and it is a biaxial joint. Next is articular ends. What are the bones which articulate from the proximal end and what bones which articulate at the distal end? Proximally, the articular ends are inferior surface of lower end of radius and articular disc of inferior radioulnar joint. These two together form ovoid articular surface from side to side. Ovoid articular surface from side to side. Distally, upper articular surface of scaphoid, lunate and triquetral. These three together form an ovoid convex surface and in between these three bones there will be intercarpal ligament, interosseous ligaments which also is involved in this articular end. Okay, so this is a picture showing distal aspect of radius and distal aspect of ulna. Now you can see the inferior articular surface of radius. Over the radius, there is an inferior articular surface which has a facet for scaphoid, which has a facet for lunate. Then it is followed by another disc called as articular disc. This articular disc is nothing but a fibrocartilage, triangular shape. This is an articular disc of inferior radioulnar joint. Inferior radioulnar joint has a articular disc. This articular disc is triangular in shape. The apex of the triangle is attached to the tip of the styloid process and the base of the articular disc is attached to the radius, distal margin of the radius, ulnar notch, distal margin of ulnar notch of radius. There the base is attached. So this is the articular disc which gives attachment, which forms the articular surface. Again I will show you here. See, this we are seeing from the anterior aspect. This we are viewing it from the inferior aspect. This is the inferior aspect of radius. Inferior aspect of radius which has a facet for scaphoid and which has a facet for lunate. And this is the inferior aspect of the articular disc which will articulate with the triquetral bone. Again, the same thing I am showing here. This is the inferior aspect of radius which has the articular surface for scaphoid and lunate, and this is the articular disc of inferior radioulnar joint which give the articular surface to triquetral bone. So we have seen the articular end from the proximal end, proximal articular end. Coming to the distal articular ends. What all we read for distal articular end? The distal articular ends are formed by proximal articular surface of scaphoid,